Friday Forum. I am Bobby Regan, the producer of today's program and chair of the City Club's Forum Board. For more than a century, the City Club of Portland is where civic-minded people have worked together to make Portland and Oregon a better place for everyone to live and explore. Our Friday Forums are a model for civil-civic dialogue. We are especially thrilled this week to have so many Portland Public School students in our audience. We're gathered today at the Centennial Hotel with a sold-out crowd and are joined by thousands of Oregonians via X-Ray FM's radio stations, KGW's website, Facebook feed and news app, and Open Signal's community media television stations. In addition to the City Club's valued media partners, our corporate sponsors enable us to continue to put on the state's best civic programs week after week. I'd like to recognize City Club's winter sponsor, Portland General Electric, and thank them for their generous support. I'd also like to thank Portland State University for sponsoring today's forum. Please join me in showing our appreciation to our sponsors as well as the staff and volunteers who have made today's event possible. Before we begin today's program, I ask us to take a moment of silence to remember the students, teachers, and staff killed and injured on Wednesday at Marjoram Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida, and to reflect on the horrific shootings that have become all too common in our schools and other public places. May our elected leaders find the courage and compassion to responsibly deal with the underlying causes of these senseless tragedies. Thank you. Education and the future of Portland Public Schools is close to my heart. As many of you know, I served on the Portland School Board for 3 terms and the Oregon School Boards Association for several terms, and have made it my life's work to create educational opportunities for our children. That's why I'm so excited to hear from our new Superintendent of Portland Public Schools, Guadalupe Guerrero. Superintendent Guerrero has arrived in Portland at a challenging time, but in just a few months has already begun to address many pressing issues. The district is redrawing school boundaries to improve educational opportunities for middle school students and, with the generous support of Portland voters, is in the process of removing lead from schools across the city and rebuilding or replacing our aging high schools. This month, school board members approved a new 3-year contract with our teachers. And the superintendent is busy restaffing a central office that has been decimated by senior-level vacancies. Superintendent Guerrero's background indicates he's up for the job. A former para-educator, classroom teacher, principal, and deputy superintendent, he has worked to improve the quality of instruction and build cultures of inclusion and innovation at every district where he has served. He has a Bachelor of Arts from UCLA and 2 certifications from Harvard, including one in the Urban Superintendent's Program. As excited as I am to introduce you to Superintendent Guerrero, I am equally proud to welcome our moderator today, J.T. Flowers. J.T. is the 2012 Lincoln High School and Portland Public School graduate who was born and raised in Northeast Portland. J.T. graduated from Yale University last year and, along with being named a Truman Scholar, was recently named a Rhodes Scholar and will be studying next year at Oxford. J.T. is the founder and former president of A Leg Even, an organization geared toward facilitating the academic and professional success of low-income college freshmen. He currently works as a field representative in the office of Congressman Earl Blumenauer. Please join me in welcoming our guests.
Wow. This is an impressive gathering. Thank you all. Good afternoon. Thank you for being present here today, and thank you to City Club, Bobby, for the opportunity to share a few thoughts, some initial learnings from my time thus far as superintendent of the Portland Public Schools. I want to recognize my bosses who are here today, members of the Board of Education. Thank you for your support continually and for being here. We're all gathered here today for our students. And a shout out because many of our students are actually here representing today. Thank you for being here. I had the opportunity to speak with them before this for a little bit of an unstructured conversation together. Okay, so as a teacher, I've learned that it's important to try and identify the learning objectives up front. So I'll list out what I hope to convey in this short talk today. 3 things. One, provide a little bit of an intro into who I am, what makes me tick, what compels me as an educator and informs my vision for the role that public education can play. Second, to share with you why Portland and what have I learned on these first few months on the job. And third, to make you aware of what we've accomplished so far and foreshadow what lies ahead in the road ahead. And I'll conclude with a challenge to all of us. And then I know we'll have some more interactive conversation with our featured moderator, the amazing JT Flowers, the most impressive person on the stage here today by far from my point of view. And thank you to his mother for being here with us today. I know that you're very proud. Before I begin, I also would be remiss as an educator, as a parent, as someone who hopes for a better world if I also didn't first acknowledge the terrible tragedy this week in Florida. Schools should be safe and supportive places for learning. It is with mixed emotions, sadness, shock, anger, that I struggle to process how so many children and adults could lose their lives, and family and loved ones so irreparably affected by this senseless act of violence. This latest school shooting and the many other tragic events that continue and have taken place, including here in Oregon, Reynolds High School 2004, Umpqua Community College in Roseburg 2015, Thurston High School in Springfield 1998, Clackamas Mall in 2012. It is long overdue to have a necessary dialogue about what level of safe and secure society are we interested in and committed to ensuring. When are we going to get serious about mental and behavioral health, addiction, bullying, hate, the revenue required to provide wraparound supports, school resource officers, community policing programs? Perhaps we should talk about and act on common sense gun control. Are we doing everything that we can? Are we doing everything that we can to keep our students safe? How can we assure families that going to school doesn't have to come with risk? From Sandy Hook to Columbine and to now Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. And even in these tragic episodes, there were acts of courage. To the teacher who huddled in the closet with her students, to the campus security officer who lost his life protecting students, and to the many students and community left to make sense of it all, our thoughts go out to you. Who am I? What are some of my core beliefs? I grew up mainly in the San Francisco Bay Area and in the Central Valley of California, mainly an agricultural region. The oldest of 4, 3 Eagle Scouts and a charming young sister. Humble beginnings, alcoholism, domestic violence, a family ultimately raised by a single mother, one who continues to demonstrate persistence, resilience, and the notion that hard work may lead to better days. My mother instilled in us to imagine a sense of place beyond our circumstance, the importance of service, love of outdoors, discipline. She cracked many a wooden spoon over me, to choose and develop a talent, and of supporting those even still less fortunate. As an English language learner student, I learned the second language in the public schools, finally beginning to speak up in middle school, a long silent period. En casa solo se hablaba español y desafortunadamente no todos nuestros alumnos tienen la oportunidad de tener su idioma natal o cultura ser reconocida o apoyada. I still speak to my mom every day in Spanish, of course, exclusively. Not all of our students have the opportunity to have their identity, their culture, and their native language appreciated and celebrated. And unfortunately, these are troubling and concerning times in our country, especially for immigrant students. School wasn't generally a positive experience for me, to be honest, and despite this and a modest family background, 2 Harvard graduate degrees hang on my wall. I spent the primary years with my desk facing the back wall of the classroom, not really understanding why me and the only other student of color in the class were relegated to the rear. The only educators I ever experienced who looked like me were my AP Spanish teacher and my high school wrestling coach. It was a happy day in 1979 when I saw those 2 busloads of new Vietnamese refugee friends join our school community because I knew the practices were going to have to change. I persisted, going on to serve as my large high school student body president, kept busy in varsity sports, was the orchestra concertmaster. I think a lot of our introverted internalizers, they seek those moments, and we have to remember that sometimes we have to be mindful of those students as well. It's a good thing that in the 4th grade, the itinerant music teacher provided me escape and the chance to learn to play the violin, something I didn't put down for 10 years. Ultimately, the arts education provided to me in public education, in that setting, and the countless hours of determined study led to a successful audition into a very highly regarded university. As a music education major, I had the opportunity to work with young students, but quickly realized that beyond their developing musical ability, they needed still greater support, as they were all too often far below grade level academically. I've dedicated my entire career to attempt to find solutions that will improve outcomes for students. As a classroom teacher, I learned that relationships and high expectations matter, that continually working at being an expert in my craft, working alongside other educators, that students can be better served. As a turnaround principal, I learned that it is possible to begin to create a counter-narrative, but also that in order to be successful, that certain system levers have to be employed, that a central office has to play a role, an active one, in order to support school improvement and the conditions on site in areas like human capital, additional resources, and interventions that ultimately caused me to pursue higher continued graduate studies. As an assistant superintendent charged with improving outcomes for a cohort of schools branded as persistently low performing, I learned that it is possible to create supportive school communities and networks of leadership that can accelerate student achievement at scale. As deputy superintendent in my previous district, I learned the power of a coherent school system and how a well-articulated strategic plan and bold innovation can be an important roadmap for improving the outcomes of an entire school system. I emphasized the importance of adopting a social justice platform and differentiating resources and supports to schools. I believe we have an obligation to eliminate opportunity gaps. We have to eliminate those barriers of systemic oppression. We have to continually examine our practices in service of students. We should guarantee that every student has access to arts education, to a full array of special education services and other student supports. All of our students should have access to quality instructional materials and enrichment. Our goal should be to create the conditions so that every individual student can discover their spark, find their passion, and in the words of Joseph Campbell, follow their bliss. This past October 1st, I started in this important role, and I've had a little more than 4 months on the job. It feels a lot longer. But there's a few things that attracted me to this gig, and perhaps it's cliche, but I believe educators go into this profession to make a difference. And I observed from my role as deputy superintendent in San Francisco that in the Portland public schools, there existed an expressed desire for a strong school system by a newly elected board, by the greater community, by school leaders. And so the opportunity to make an exponential difference couldn't be greater. And understand their passion, the more I am convinced that a better future is possible. And what I suspected and what my observations have confirmed is that Portland is a community that supports and values its schools. This is evident in the amazing parent involvement, the large percentage of students who attend our schools, and in the overwhelming support for a bond to both modernize and create safe school buildings. I'm hopeful to be here to help us usher in a new chapter. I believe we have more promise and potential than problems. We did not end up here overnight, and it will take time to achieve our desired outcomes. While graduation rates have continued to tick upwards, we know that we need to re-engage and ensure that many more students are walking across the stage with a post-secondary plan. Other work that continues to be underway include critically important health and safety work, school modernization. This fall, we anticipate commencing a broad community visioning process to capture what our collective and shared aspiration is for our school system. This co-constructed vision will inform the development of an accompanying strategic plan, one that will provide us with a long-term direction towards how we will operationalize towards making PPS a premier school system, one that inspires public confidence and pride in the broader community. So the challenge I pose to all of us is, and here's what I'm asking of all of you, and on behalf of our students, please remain engaged. We need your support. If you're a parent or a family member, thank you for being involved in your child's school. What additional advocacy role can you play to ensure public education in Oregon becomes a true priority? When we begin our visioning process, please lend your input. If you're a student, we need your voice. You must remain at the center of all our well-intentioned efforts. For business leaders, how can you support our efforts in career technical education? How can our students have clear on-ramps to local industry? How can we support our students with paid internships? For our philanthropic friends, we will count on your commitment to help us build our innovation fund to support upcoming initiatives in a range of important focus areas that promote African American student achievement, early education, social emotional learning, professional communities of practice, arts education, just to name a few. We will need everyone's contribution to build the kind of school system that serves all of our students effectively, and I intend to continue lending my leadership to this cause. Let's mark this occasion. This is where our journey of transformation begins. Thank you.
For our broadcast audience, this is City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm JT Flowers, and today we're talking about the future of public education in Portland with Guadalupe Guerrero, the Superintendent of Portland Public Schools. What an honor it is to be sharing a stage with you today, Mr. Superintendent.
Thank you for sharing it with me, JT, because you're an impressive young chap.
I feel like the superintendent's giving me far too much credit today. This day is, above all else, about you and about your vision for this place. I'd love to talk about your roots a bit. You touched on this in your opening remarks. You're someone who, from an early age, has been acquainted with hardship. You describe yourself in many ways as a student who was cast aside by the public education system. Why then decide to dedicate your entire career to such a system, and what does that commitment to service mean not only for your family, but for families like yours across this country?
Well, hopefully I spared you the gritty details, but I did, mention these, and I think it's a great question, JT. What you learn when you go through certain experiences in life is you got to ask yourself, is there something that I can do to prevent these kinds of situations, these kinds of circumstances in other kids like me? It helps to inform you as a person. It helps to inform you as an educator. Certainly, I had the experience of learning English later in the public schools. I didn't have the benefit of bilingual education or a solid instruction that was giving me access to content. So it has caused me to think about how do we make sure we have the repertoire of strategies to serve our second language learners, our diverse learners. How do we remember to not pay attention to only the externalizing student, but maybe the quiet one who you may not even know has a lot going on? And what are the hooks? What are the ways that we can engage our students? Maybe it's athletics, maybe it's clubs, maybe it's some other extracurricular. But we know when kids have a meaningful relationship with at least one adult, it makes all the difference. And so how do we think about our own servant leadership, being in the roles that we're in? How do we help our students persist? And I would throw the question back, JT. You're a successful young person. I'm hopeful that when I'm in my rocking chair, we're going to be okay. What were the things in your life that allowed you to persist and have that resilience and find yourself with the world as your oyster right now?
Sure. I'm someone who has been propped up by the people in my life from birth to the present moment. My mother is someone who has looked out for me. Even when it wasn't always easy to do so, she's someone who's been on my back when she needed to be on my back, and she's been in my corner cheering when I've been afforded opportunities worthy of celebration. So I'd say the people in my life, whether they be my mother, my grandmother, other educators in the school system like Mark Halpburn, my English teacher, or Peyton Chapman, my high school principal, who pulled me aside and expressed a belief in me, those were the things that allowed me to persist even when I might not have thought I could have done so.
We had a great conversation about an hour ago with many of our high school students, and as we were talking, we asked, what is it that gets you up in the morning? What gets you excited about your school day experience? What's the best of? And they cited some really important things that we should be paying attention to. How do we expand on those? They named things like having a Black student union, offering ethnic studies, making sure that schools are safe environments, that it's free of bullying and harassment, that I feel like I belong, that I can be myself, that I can develop my own sense of identity, that I grow into my own sense of agency. That's impressive. How do we encourage more of our kids to begin to sort of take ownership for their own education and to hold us accountable for making sure we're affording them those kinds of opportunities?
Absolutely. Those hooks, as you described them, are so critical in anchoring students to their educational experience. On that subject, what is the hook that roped you into this job in Portland, Oregon, of all places? This is a school district that, by many people's definitions, was in a state of disarray when you arrived. Why come here and why now?
Well, I do like me a challenge, if that isn't evident from my resume. It's always the situation where, you and your community are making a difference, and yet not all the indicators are always demonstrating what you know to be good work, because there's another layer on top of that that reveals itself that requires a systemic intervention. I think what attracted me to Portland is, as I just stated, it really stood out as an opportunity to make an exponential difference. It was a city that is ready to move forward. We have a newly elected board that's committed, that wants to create a school district that can better guarantee success for many more of its students, that it is thinking both in the short term and in the long term. And even though there's been a little bit of a mutiny out of the central administration, there's some really talented, committed leaders who have persisted through these rocky roads. And as we add in and identify and recruit other talented individuals, I'm excited about how that's an opportunity. It's a grand opportunity to lend leadership. I'm under no illusion that I singularly am going to make the kind of difference that we all want to see. So it really does take a team. In the same way it requires that at the school level, it requires that at the central office letter, and level, and I just feel blessed to be surrounded by a group of passionate people.
On that topic, you have a number of openings on your central staff. You knew I was going to ask about this. I can see by your smile. Over the past year and a half, there's been somewhat of an exodus from the central office of Portland Public Schools. Do you see that as an opportunity or a persistent curse? And how do you plan to deal with that dynamic? How do you plan to attract and maintain top talent in a district with such a reputation?
Well, there's certainly a similarly minded group of proven leaders around the country who get excited about the call to action. Folks like to lend their talents to a transformation effort. And yes, the conditions have been difficult. If you only read the media, you're not getting a fully objective picture of what's going on. You need a collective efficacy to move this agenda, but folks want to be part of a winning team. And I'm excited that we've made some key leadership appointments since my arrival. We have a new deputy superintendent, a new chief of staff. We continue to build our communications capacity because we know that's so critical with our stakeholders. And I'm just very excited to see that A-team coming together. It represents just the initial phases of some continued changes and personnel appointments, and that'll trickle all the way down the organization. It's going to take that kind of reaffirmation of the importance of leadership, and it is exciting to identify those individuals that are going to help us get to the playoffs.
Sure. The importance of leadership can't be overstated, whether it be at the central office level or in classrooms themselves. How do you plan to attract a more diverse teaching force? One of the questions we got backstage when we were speaking with a group of students earlier had to do with the fact that so few of our students of color see themselves reflected in the teaching force that educates them from the time they step into our public education system to the time they leave it. One, is that a priority of your administration? And two, if it is, how do you plan to deal with it?
Well, it should be our shared priority. It's a little alarming if any one of our Portland students enters kindergarten and never experiences an educator or staff who represents the wider demographic of the city. So the challenge there is, how do we create those pipelines, those career lattices, where we're identifying, supporting, developing a diverse workforce. I was one of those people. I started off as a classroom aide. And folks identified potential in me and continued to encourage me, the successive series of demotions. I was just fine working with students every day. But we have to recognize individuals out there who have leadership potential within them and encourage them to enter the profession. Our students need those role models, and we have to be creative as a school system. We need to think about parent-to-teacher pipelines. We have to have high school teacher academies or cadet programs. We should encourage, much in the same way I was involved in my previous two districts with launching an urban teacher residency program. I'm happy to see PSU and other higher education partners that I've been spending time with recognize this as a mutual interest to make sure that we're encouraging educators of color as well. It tends to be a white female profession, and that's okay too, but we should have some diversity in the ranks as well. And just to add another statistic there's 197 school districts in the state of Oregon, and there are 5 Latino superintendents.
That's, frankly speaking, unacceptable, if we're being honest with ourselves. And that's why it's all the more important that you're here at the helm of this district in particular. As it pertains to our students, our expectations for them are such an important part of their long-term trajectories. Where do we set the ceiling, particularly given this shift in the workforce that we are likely to experience over the course of the 21st century? How do you set a ceiling that is, in a sense, moving and high enough not to cap students prematurely?
So here's the cool thing. We don't have to set any ceilings for our students. I would say probably JT. Our task is, how do we help our students identify and discover their spark and cultivate their passion? How do we have them develop a plan for pursuing that passion? How do we teach them the transferable skills around sense of agency and leadership, place in the world? We don't know what industry awaits them when they finish, but certainly right now we should be thinking about what do those pathways look like in their experience? How do we expand on the offerings in career, technical, and education? How do we partner with business out there to create those opportunities? Schools should surround themselves around setting those high expectations with our students so they can blossom. How many other JT flowers are we not unearthing, are not blossoming when we don't have plans like that?
On that note, how do we identify talent within our school systems? Are there students who are falling through the cracks right now? And you posed this in the form of a number of questions, but on the level of solutions, what can we do to make sure those students aren't falling through the cracks?
Sure. Well, we recognize that our graduation rate isn't 100%. So what happened to the other 24 or 25%? At some point, they disengaged. And it's not enough to make a call and knock on the door and say, come back to more of what you didn't like. So what are those other multiple pathways? What are those alternatives that still, I think our kids want to have success in life, but for everybody, the egg crate Prussian model of schooling doesn't work. It's not for everybody. So what are the other ways that we can encourage our students to pursue a livelihood? But I think the graduation issue, we have to go way upstream to solve that problem. Aside from re-engaging and giving supports to our secondary students, we should catch those patterns early on. What do our 9th grade early warning indicators tell us? What can we do to support the transition from the middle grades that we redesign so that it gives them the foundation to enter high school and persist, not just into a college application, but even through that? And if we really want to kind of drill down, we know there's a lot of kids that don't have the literacy skills that they should have at the end of 2nd and 3rd grade. And frankly, the graduation rate, it's evident there in the students when they enter kindergarten. We look at our kindergarten readiness indicators, and we know which students we should be providing early intervention and support to. This is why you're going to continue to hear my voice and continue to work collectively here in the state of Oregon, because we have to start valuing and promoting and expanding on early education, high-quality preschool. So when you ask me why Portland, JT, what I probably should have added to that is I saw this not as an opportunity to just come lend some leadership in PPS, but it's the largest school system in the state. It has the opportunity to set a demonstration, to influence the agenda in the state of Oregon. Already have begun to do that work with my colleagues to think about these same vexing challenges we all have, whether there's 6 schools in your district or there's 85. We're all struggling with the same themes. How do we support students with social emotional learning? How can we all be better trauma informed? How do we better support the diverse learners that we see in front of us? How do we better engage our families to be a part of that conversation? This is some of what the attractor was, I guess.
That makes a great deal of sense. You've talked a lot about addressing needs in a targeted way. One of the ways that Portland Public Schools has tried to do that throughout history has been through providing specialty programming. Can you talk a bit about the state of specialty programming at the district and how your administration is conceiving of handling that challenge moving forward?
Well, I think in any school system, it's important to define what is the broader array of the school portfolio and its programmatic offerings, and how do you give all students and families access to those? And how does the general school provide a more comprehensive experience so you don't have to necessarily leave your neighborhood school? I mean, you could have that choice, but you shouldn't have to do it in order to get arts. in order to have athletics, in order to have some of those electives that everybody should have. This is why our board identified and is committed to reimagining our middle schools, to reconfiguring and having those comprehensives, because regardless of which middle school you attend, there should be a certain foundation of offerings that our students can access. And so when you think about some of those specialty programs, it extends to even the unique populations that school systems, public ed in particular, doesn't always serve well. And so that includes ensuring we have a broad safety net and support for our English learners. It means working towards inclusive practices being integrated into every one of our classrooms. It means working towards making sure we have a full continuum of special education services, so that in whatever way that it's appropriate, that a team have the opportunity to decide the student will be fine in the general ed setting with supports, or perhaps in some cases it's perfectly appropriate that they be engaged in a more unique setting. And that's the challenge, is making sure that we're constantly building on that continuum for all of our students to access as appropriate.
Absolutely. That dynamic and the solutions that are going to be able to fix that dynamic are philosophical in nature, they're policy-based in nature, they're also infrastructural. We have a pretty severe mismatch between the needs of our district and the physical infrastructure that's accessible to us. How is your administration intending to handle that mismatch? And what are some of the implications of that mismatch on a practical level for the students who pass through our schools?
I too am very grateful to be coming into a school system where folks in the city of Portland have made that commitment to rebuild its schools. And if you haven't had a chance to visit schools like Roosevelt and Franklin, Grant is under construction. We'll have a new Kellogg school. The work that is going on to modernize and ensure that the teaching and learning environment is everything that our students deserve. And we may have some beautiful secondary schools, but folks, in times of recession, what tends to fall off the page is a lot of the deferred maintenance that all of our schools need to have. It's not okay for a first grader to be in an elementary school where the roof is leaking, where the tiles are coming off, where you can't trust the water that you're drinking. So we're working aggressively to remediate and fix for all of those things. So how do we make sure that the facilities themselves are able to host learning? But I think you're also mentioning, JT, here is that we're also constrained by the facilities we have available. I really wish we had more campuses to create dedicated spaces for some of our valued programs, but we have the buildings we have right now. And so I know that our board is very interested in the conversation around, what can we do to make sure we have the sufficient number of campuses that are aligned with the kind of programming that we want to offer across the city.
Sure. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about something that's been swirling in the news the past few weeks. How have you planned to tackle this particular dynamic as it pertains to the public dilemma between Access and Pioneer?
Well, that's a great question, JT. You're going there. Both of these, and I don't want there to be any mistake about this, are valued programs. And unfortunately, in our commitment to bring equity in the middle grades and to reconfigure buildings, we are asking hundreds of our families to find themselves on new campuses this coming fall. And unfortunately, in the process, we have displaced some special and unique programs. And the challenge there is, how do we accommodate that?
Can you explain very quickly for our radio listeners who might not know what Access and Pioneer are respectively, what those programs are intended to do?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think in the Portland Public Schools, we are growing in our ability to identify and serve our talented and gifted students. And on one end of the continuum, we have a special program to serve those students. in a unique setting. And in a parallel way, it's the same thing with our special needs students. We want to have that full continuum available of programming and support for our special needs students. And Pioneer is one of those programs that is really doing a unique job at supporting our students and our families for whom those students need to have their needs met that way in that kind of a setting. And so how do you recreate that kind of community if either of these programs or any of the other programs and school communities that are shifting and finding themselves in a different physical location?
Thank you for that. We have time for about one more question before we're going to move over to Q&A. Given the events that occurred yesterday, I'd like to ask you about this concept of safety. Portland is a city that recently hired a new police chief in Danielle Outlaw. That in and of itself is, it implies that we as a city are starting to think about what the word safety means and how it should play out at the level of a city. What does that look like within a school system?
Well, clearly a school system doesn't operate in isolation. Our work it does overlap and needs to intersect with social services, human services, housing, employment opportunities, our police bureau, our mayor's office. They all play a slice in the kind of collective impact that I hope we all want to make in the city of Portland. Chief Outlaw, like myself, as I'm sure you all know, are new here in the city of Portland, coming from the San Francisco Bay Area. We've had some great conversations, her and I, about our experience coming into Portland from the Bay Area. And the challenge in many ways is similar, but different in some ways, in that we are trying to engage our organizations through a transformation that better serves our clients. And so that's where we're at right now.
Thank you for that, Mr. Superintendent. For our broadcast audience, this is City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm JT Flowers, and today we're talking about the future of public education in Portland with Guadalupe Guerrero, the Superintendent of Portland Public Schools. Let's now take some time to go to the audience for some questions. Everyone watching or listening today is welcome to ask a question. If you've written a question on an index card, hold it high for the staff to collect. You can also submit questions via Twitter using the hashtag FridayForum. For City Club members who would like to ask a question at the microphone, please let the students in the audience ask a question first. When it's your turn, identify yourself as a member and ask one question in 30 seconds or less. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Kendall Green, and I go to school at Roosevelt, and I'm a City Club member. And the question I have for you is, so the incident that happened in Florida on Wednesday, what's something you can do to prevent that from happening, something like at a school here in the Portland School District?
That's an important question. So the events this year, tragically, they do ask us to pause and reflect on what are our policies, what are our practices. It's a good time to stop and say, are we doing everything we can to be prepared, God forbid, for a situation like that? And as we were talking about earlier with students, safety extends beyond being prepared. I don't know how you ever can be for an active shooter situation, but all the other layers of safety that are meaningful to our students. So we are actually getting that guidance out to our school leaders. Hopefully they will continue drilling and having these conversations at the school level, and we ourselves at the central level are making sure we're doing everything we can to prepare ourselves for situations that hopefully we don't have to encounter.
Hi, Mr. Guerrero. My name's Akili. I'm a junior at Lincoln. I have a question for you today. So PPS struggles with disproportionate discipline, and I was wondering, as our new superintendent, what plans you had to alleviate those problems?
I think that's a great question. We know who's not succeeding on all the positive indicators, and you only need to turn and see who's being recognized on the other ones. And so when you bring up disproportionality, whether it's in discipline, whether it's in SPED referral, or any other area, we got to critically examine that. And in reference to this particular topic area, what emphasis, what initiative do we put in place as a school system to ensure we're creating and cultivating safe and supportive environments? So we have to do the work around student engagement. We have to do positive behavior intervention systems. We have to adopt a multi-tiered system of supports. We have to have some tier 2 evidence-based practices. We need to engage in the kind of professional learning and leadership development that narrows or eliminates those kinds of disproportionalities. And then how do we get to the root cause of why those incidents are occurring? I mean, that's the real conversation also. So you do have to have a broad toolkit, from restorative practices to conversations around creating safe environments in our schools.
My name is Oscar. I'm a junior at Roosevelt, and
Go Riders.
3-year civic scholar so far. My question is, how do you intend to improve teacher diversity before I graduate?
I love it, Oscar. We want transformation, but we want the change now. And so I share your sense of urgency, and this goes into some of my own lessons I'm learning along the way. How do we stay bold and innovative? How do we make these moves that may have some good pedagogical reason behind them? The challenge is, how do you engage in a thoughtful change management? How do we not shortcut the necessary communication? And so I'm certainly taking my lumps in that regard. And so how do we balance an ability to proceed together in thoughtful ways? Because that's the same urgency I feel, Oscar, is we don't want it to be 2 generations from now and we're still talking about it. Right? How do we start to embark on courageous leadership? How do we grow sufficient relational trust that when we make moves like these, that we can be okay with attempting another approach? What I would argue is, we know what we're getting already, so why don't we try something else?
Hi, my name is Zoe Doom from Roosevelt High School, and this is a question I asked in our earlier discussion, but I wanted to bring it up again. Myself and other people I know have faced a lot of discrimination and harassment in classrooms, both from students and sometimes from teachers. And so my question is, how specifically can you ensure that teachers and staff are prepared to skillfully and compassionately respond to discrimination in discrimination and harassment in classrooms?
So safety's the theme today. Well, here's what I can share. In our bargaining sessions with our Teachers Association, we were in solid agreement about the need to better support our students, support our educators, provide them with the tools and the professional learning to be able to establish the kind of positive school climates that make improvement possible. Without relational trust, you really can't expect transformation to take place. And so that's a continued effort that you have to embark on. But how do we elevate the voice of student in that process? So what I can share with you is we've agreed to do some specific things that will focus on safety and school climate, and that will be a signature practice in our PD sessions next year.
I'd like to take one question from a note card quickly. Even though our school is diverse, I feel like not many students know about different cultures and religions. So how do we expect them to respect our beliefs if they don't know what they are in the first place? And since ethnic studies is only for a specific grade level, how can we put it in classes so every grade level is able to learn about different cultures and religions?
So part of the answer is in the question. We need more ethnic studies. But you shouldn't have to wait to get to high school and hopefully get into that class. All of our studies, pre-K through 12, should teach the material in objective ways. We want our students to be critical consumers of information. We need to be objective in looking in our history. So how do we apply that lens in everything that we do?
Thank you, and we'll go to you.
Hi, my name is Anna Mills. I go to Roosevelt. And early in the discussion, we mentioned the inequalities that we see in Portland Public Schools. At Roosevelt, many of us see the evident inequality in the opportunities given to schools. Specifically at Roosevelt, we feel we don't have enough resources that other schools have. And so, especially with next year losing our Title I status, My specific question is, what are your specific plans, especially since we're losing the status, that the students feel that there's an equal amount of resources and opportunity?
That's a great question, and it goes back to the commitment that I understand and appealed to me about engaging in this work in Portland Public Schools from our board and the broader community. It wants equitable opportunities. It shouldn't so much matter which school you happen to get into. There's got to be some foundational guarantee around the supports that you can count on as a student. And so I think this fairness of opportunity is an important one. And whether or not you have a designated status, what are the things the school community needs in order to better serve its students, and how do we prioritize those investments in the limited resources we have? And that means we're going to make some trade-offs, and we're going to stop doing some things, especially if there's no data to show that it is having an impact.
Thanks, Mr. Superintendent. I'd like to take another question from the cards. What role do you see charter schools playing in Portland Public Schools?
I'm coming from two previous school districts that were not necessarily friendly to the idea of a diverse portfolio. In Boston, we created an internal model, pilot schools. I taught at one. And in San Francisco, one of the notions I often talked about is charters are often created because of the flexibility, the opportunity to test something bold, something more innovative. They have other flexibilities, but I always kind of scratch my head. Why is it that the traditional school system is characterized as stodgy and not able itself to be bold and innovative? And so there are lots of examples of the ways that school systems do that. So I think I can empathize with the community who feels that its students have not been served well, and so they launch into creating a charter community. What I encourage us to do is to take a close look at what is working when they have that kind of flexibility, and what do we learn from some of those promising practices, especially when they're able to better serve apparently certain subgroups of our students that perhaps we're not doing as well at. So how do we truly make them incubators, and how do we take some of those ideas to scale? And so it's okay to engage in boutique reform and make things great for a school community. My interest is, how do we do that for 50,000 students?
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Zeta from Madison High School, and we pride ourselves in being a restorative justice school, so touching on equity and discipline, how can we incorporate restorative justice practices into our policies and our curriculum before it comes an after-the-fact practice?
And Mr. Superintendent, would you mind explaining what restorative justice is for audience members who may not know?
Well, what I appreciate about integrating restorative practices as another tool in promoting safe and supportive schools is that it allows us to recognize when harm's been done and try to repair that relationship and really kind of dissect the circumstance and try to make sure we have a positive relationship that can move forward. And as I said to the students earlier, it's important to have that capacity. And how do we not have the incidents in the first place where we find ourselves having to repair harm? And so there's the challenge. Sometimes perhaps it's unavoidable, but we've got to do all of it simultaneously.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lisa Amani, and I'm from Roosevelt High School. And so at Roosevelt, we have different school clubs, and one of them is the Black Student Union. And my question is, since we want to keep growing and be more involved in outside activities, how do you plan on helping us to better grow and for it to expand and to get different opportunities outside of the school?
So school districts don't always have a lot of resources, but the one thing we should prioritize is making sure that our students have the resources to be able to come together, whether it's encouraging BSUs across all of our high schools or other affinity groups or other clubs and extracurriculars. We should take care of that first. So that's definitely something you can look forward to us supporting.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Oliver, student at Roosevelt. As a student in public schools, I know that school lunches are not like as healthy as tasty as they could be. how do you intend to improve the quality of school lunches in the district?
And this is going to be our last question.
I'm with you. We need to make sure our students' meals are not just nutritious, but appetizing. And, school systems everywhere are notorious in that regard. So I'd be really interested in hearing students' ideas about how to get a little bit more locally sourced and tasty and everything else. Those meals are very important to our students, and we really need to give some careful thought about providing them.
I have to say it is heartbreaking for me to end this discussion today, and I'm so sorry that we don't have time to have everyone in the room ask questions. I really wish that we could, but unfortunately our time is up and we need to pause the conversation for now. We do hope that this is the beginning of even more in-depth conversations for each of you. Please join me in thanking our panel for being here today. Thank you for coming, and we hope to see you again at another City Club event soon. We're adjourned.